you're assuming that the women are weak and just can't do anything except be here.
It's interesting because people often put me as an activist when I'm really just a musical theater girl.
Woke media hosts have learned absolutely nothing and are continuing to defend the indefensible. We're going to break down the latest wild segment on The View over trans issues, a controversial deportation effort that's sparking free speech concerns, and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our politics, and our media, all from an independent perspective. Up first, like I mentioned, the lovely ladies over at The View decided to host controversial transgender activist and TikTok star Dylan Mulvaney for an interview promoting Dylan's new book, during which Whoopi Goldberg, one of the main hosts of The View, made some absolutely bizarre statements about transgender rights and about trans athletes competing in women's sports that we have to go over because they show just how little some of these liberal media figures have learned. Let's take a listen to this first clip.
I wanted to ask you, because there's been all of this debate about whether transgender athletes should be able to compete. And last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom said that he thinks that trans athletes competing in girls' and women's sports was deeply unfair.
Okay, so I'm going to let Whoopi finish, but I was just struck watching this, and I imagine many of you will too, how Whoopi is saying something almost everyone agrees with. It's like an 80-20 issue, that allowing trans women who are biological males at birth to compete in women's sports is deeply unfair. She's saying it like it's the craziest thing she's ever heard. I can't believe he said it's deeply unfair. And it's like, really? You're that out of touch? But apparently she is, as the rest of this conversation made clear. Let's keep watching.
Now, I want to hear what you think, because I'll tell you what I think, too. Yeah.
The last time I played a sport, I was 6 years old, and I was on a soccer team, but I assigned myself as the nurse. So I sat with the Band-Aids. And so, in the words of Wicked, I am not that girl.
So I actually appreciated that Dylan Mulvaney basically just dodged the question and didn't really give an answer, because Dylan doesn't seem to know much about this and didn't want to wade into that territory. So for once, honestly, good on Dylan. But Whoopi, for her part, kept going. Take a listen.
I think part of the problem that the trans community is facing, and it's the same problem that women face, is if you don't know anything about our bodies, you don't know how it works. Mm-hmm. So when you come in and you say, oh, these are men, competing against women, you're assuming that the women are weak and just can't do anything except be here. Have you seen female athletes? They know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what's going on or why this is an issue.
So this is wild. She's saying that we, the people who think biological males have an advantage in women's sports, are the ones that don't know anything about women's bodies. Babe, basic biology is not on your side. And I'm sorry, I totally reject the second point, that it is somehow denigrating female athletes to suggest that they can't compete with biological males on a fair and level playing field. No, it is not. I mean, it is no shame on them. They're excelling at the absolute highest level that's possible. But there's pretty big gaps between males and females in some sports. I mean, you can look at the world records in different track events for women, and then there's a fair number of high school boys who can beat them, right? There really are astounding differences in the physique and biology of males and females that are reduced but don't go away fully with hormone therapy or gender transition. And it's totally absurd to suggest that you're denigrating female athletes by arguing, they can't compete with that and it's not fair. You're not. They're different groups that are separated for a reason. And it doesn't take anything away from the accomplishments of the people in one group that they are separated from another group for factors outside of their control. I just don't understand how they can still not get it. Like, not get it at all. Even if they don't agree, shouldn't they have more of an understanding at this point of what the other side's position even is? Or are they really that deep in an echo chamber. Now I'm going to show you the second clip where they get into the truly radical parts of trans activism after this. People constantly ask me where they can get truly fair and unbiased news, but the truth is there's no such thing. The only way to sort fact from fiction and get to the real truth is to know what both sides are saying, which is why I've used Ground News for years. Ground News gathers related articles from around the world in one place, with context about the source's political leaning, reliability, and ownership, so you can compare coverage and quickly understand the bigger picture. For example, you guys remember the story we covered a couple of weeks ago about the intelligence community employees in official government chats who were talking about sex changes, genital surgeries, and other very explicit material. Well, a story like that is so subject to bias and partisan spin that you can only really find out what's happening with Ground News. Right-leaning media highlighted the most inflammatory parts of the story, like the Post-Millennial, where their headline reads, CIA NSA officials use government chat to say they want intersex babies so children can choose gender later. Meanwhile, using Ground News, we can see that not very many left-of-center outlets covered this story, but the left-leaning LGBT media outlets that did cover it very much downplayed the scandal. Pink News writes, NSA staff accused of sex chats at work, but they were just discussing LGBTQ plus issues. This really puts media bias on full display, because describing those highly graphic chats as just discussing LGBTQ issues might be the understatement of the century. It is so hard to deal with information overload and the sensationalism of modern media and figure out what's really going on. But that's a key part of my job here on this show, and it's why I use Ground News all the time, and I'm happy to recommend it to you guys. You can get the same plan that I use, which is the Vantage subscription, if you sign up through the link on screen in the description, ground.news/Brad, or scan the QR code on screen to get unlimited access to every feature on the platform for just $5 a month. Sign up now, you'll be glad you did. Okay, so the conversation on The View with Dylan Mulvaney moved along from trans sports into even more fraught territory, like medically transitioning minors and the broader backlash we're witnessing against the trans community right now. Take a listen.
The trans community is really under attack in this country, right? With gender-affirming care for minors being banned, actually, in many states. The anti-trans rhetoric coming from some conservative lawmakers caused the Human Rights Campaign to declare a state of emergency for the LGBTQ plus community. What is your message to people in the trans community during this time when the community really is under attack?
So we will go over Dylan's response, but first I just want to talk about the framing here from host Sunny Hostin. She's conflating two totally different issues. I do agree, and I strongly object to it, that there has been a huge uptick and groundswell in genuine vitriol towards trans people, towards truly nasty rhetoric. And I do think the Human Rights Campaign declaring a state of emergency for LGBTQ rights is kind of ridiculous, particularly because I mean, they've been around since the 1980s, and things are certainly not worse today than they were in 1985. And also, they're conflating gay people with trans people, and the situations are very different in today's day and age. But we can have a conversation about how a lot of this backlash is going too far and getting really nasty, and they are just picking on people who want to just adults who want to live their lives. However, conflating that with entirely reasonable efforts to stop kids from getting sex changes is disingenuous and shows that you still don't get it. These are not safe and effective treatments for kids. They're radical, experimental, unproven medical treatments that kids can't consent to. And it's not inherently anti-trans or hateful to want to restrict kids from getting these treatments. It's common sense and a vast majority position. Conflating that with the overall rise in nastiness towards trans people does it a disservice and totally skews our way to talk about this issue. It also ignores that the radicalism is part of what's prompted that backlash. The fact that they're all in on sex changes for minors. The fact that they totally ignore and deny biology in so many aspects and don't just ask for the freedom to, live differently anymore. The fact that they tried to force the stuff down people's throats and bully people into using ridiculous and fake pronouns. All of this has led to the backlash, and she's just calling out the backlash without discussing why is this happening, and then also conflating the nasty backlash with totally legitimate policy concerns and objections. That's not great. Now, here's Dylan's answer.
I think what we're living through is something that in the history books will be written about, and I want to make sure that my piece of it is advocacy. And it's interesting because people often put me as an activist when I'm really just a musical theater girl who now wrote a book. But I think if I was to be able to speak directly to trans people, I would tell them that the parts of us that they are attacking are the best parts of us, and that it's what makes us special and is magic. And hopefully they can see that. And if the folks who maybe don't see me as a woman, which is such a shame, but I just hope that they can find a trans person who they can connect with. Yeah. To see that we are not monsters, that we're not trying to hurt anyone, and that we're really just doing our best the same as everyone else.
So while I certainly agree that trans people in general aren't monsters, and a lot of them aren't trying to hurt anyone else for sure, I have to call BS on a couple of things that Dylan said. First and foremost, Dylan's like, I'm not an activist. Yes, you are. You literally went to the White House and met with President Biden to do an interview about why kids must have access to life-altering sex changes as minors.
I'm using my platform to stand up for my community and for any of the little Dylans that deserve a clear path to their true identity.
Mr. President, this is my 221st day of publicly transitioning.
God love you.
Thank you. I am extremely privileged to live in a state that allows me access to the resources I need, and that decision is just between me and my doctors. But many states have lawmakers that feel like they can involve themselves in this very personal process. Do you think states should have a right to ban gender-affirming health care?
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that.
So you can't do stuff like that and then claim, I'm not an activist, I'm just a theater girly. Like, you can't do that. You can't, the same way that if people criticize me or attack me online, I couldn't be like, I'm just a private citizen saying my opinion. No, like I've spoken up, I've made myself a public figure, I've put my opinion out there. So then that comes with the territory. Now, some of the backlash against Dylan has been over the top. I still think the whole freak out over Bud Light was vastly taken out of proportion. It was just like one tiny social media campaign, and they boycotted the whole company, a huge, massive boycott, just because they sent one TikTok influencer a custom can. I think that was blown out of proportion, but you can't pretend not to be an activist at all when you've been doing activism. And part of the problem with this is that Dylan doesn't seem aware, and it would have been interesting if The View had raised this point or this concern. But of course, they're not going to do that because it was a softball interview, not real journalism. But the brand of Dylan Mulvaney, the days of girlhood thing that Dylan did, was a particular type of newfound trans visibility that almost seemed to mock women and femininity, because it was such a cartoonish and stereotypical version of what it means to be a woman. Sometimes said kind of in jest by Dylan, but sometimes not.
Day 66, being a girl, and today I'm in nature. Trees, I love them. Water, lakes, I love them. Heels, they're my hiking heels. I love them. Okay, come on. Bridges, love them. Coconut water, love it. Not nad, just love it. Wind turbine, love it. Meadows, love them. I'm scared of getting Lyme disease. Love ya. Ah! Oh. Did you see that? I gotta get out of here. Did you see that?
There's a dragonfly.
Oh my God. Never again. Get me out of here. Love ya.
So I feel like it would have been more interesting to ask Dylan if Dylan doesn't feel some responsibility or accountability for encouraging and prompting the backlash that we're seeing now with such a demeaning and stereotypical version of women and femininity that Dylan got famous for. Honestly, if you want adults with serious gender dysphoria to be able to live their best lives as trans adults, which is what I believe in, always have and always will, you should want people like Dylan Mulvaney, who are very toxic and controversial, to be out of the spotlight, not be uplifting them as the face of this community. That's actually why things have gotten so unpopular in the first place. At least it's part of it. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button while you're at it. All right, guys, we got a huge story for our next segment, but first, quick reminder to check out the merch, linked in the description. We've got great Your Delulu is showing sweaters and long sleeves and mugs available now. My boyfriend worked really hard putting it all together, so do check it out. And now, we gotta talk about one of the messiest and most controversial and convoluted stories I've had to cover in some time. One that honestly pulls at different values I strongly believe in, from free speech to national security to due process to opposing terror and support for violence. This is the Trump administration's highly controversial move to deport a leader of the Columbia University anti-Israel protests, arguably pro-Hamas protests, by revoking his green card and having him deported. This has become a huge story. Not all the facts are totally clear, but here's some News Nation reporting to kind of just set the ground floor of what happened, and then we're going to get into what both sides are saying about it, and then I'll give you my take. Take a listen to this from News Nation.
The president's promise to crack down on what he calls illegal campus protests, now putting Columbia University directly in the crosshairs. Mahmoud Khalil is waking up in ICE custody this morning. The Palestinian activist led chaotic protests that occupied buildings and sparked demonstrations on campuses across the country. News Nation's Brooke Schaefer has the very latest. And Brooke, the crux of this case is that Khalil's green card might be revoked over this, right?
Marky, this Columbia grad student and Palestinian activist now in federal immigration custody, facing deportation this morning. Federal agents telling his attorney they are following State Department orders to revoke the student's visa and green card. ICE agents arrested Mahmoud Khalil in his university apartment in New York over the weekend. Khalil was one of the leaders during the pro-Palestinian protest on Columbia's campus last spring. He was one of the most visible people involved in those protests, one of the few to publicly share his name. The Department of Homeland Security overnight accused Khalil of leading activities promoting and aligning with Hamas, which they say violates President Trump's order banning anti-Semitism on college campuses. President Trump has promised to crack down on students who joined in protest against the war in Gaza, claiming that by supporting Hamas, students have forfeited their right to remain in the U.S. Khalil's arrest over the weekend, the first publicly known deportation effort to follow those threats from the Trump administration. Khalil, who reports say grew up in Syria, is a legal permanent resident, according to his attorney. He's also married to a U.S. citizen who is 8 months pregnant.
So those are kind of just the facts of the situation, but let's take a quick look at how many people on the left are discussing it. Many of them are framing this as if it's some sort of obviously illegal and authoritarian and fascist crackdown against free speech. For example, here is DNC Vice Chair David Hogg.
Today, the Trump administration took one more step on their authoritarian march, detaining Palestinian student and recent graduate of Columbia University, Mahmoud Khalil. When ICE agents detained him, he was next to his wife, who's been pregnant for 8 months. And when his lawyers called the ICE agents who were detaining him to ask for a warrant, they literally hung up on his lawyer. This is a blatant violation of the Constitution. This is a blatant violation of our rights. And this is a threat to Americans everywhere. Regardless of whether or not you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, or otherwise, all of us need to be extremely concerned about this. Donald Trump is trying to shut down young people and stop us from speaking out, because he, like all other authoritarians, believe that they have to shut down freedom of speech, freedom of expression, so that they can rule like a king. In this country, we don't bow to kings, and we need our young people to stand up to Donald Trump, because he knows that we are one of the biggest threats against him. This is bullshit. This is happening, and we can't let it stand.
Side note, I will get into it later, but I did find it annoying how he conflates this with all young people. This is very clearly about the rights and limits of speech of non-citizens, not U.S. citizens. So conflating it with all young people like that is demagogic. Other progressive commentators similarly went apoplectic over this. Young Turks founder Cenk Uygur tweeted, "Mahmoud Khalil is Trump's first political prisoner. They charged him with the crime of being anti-Semitic. There is no such crime. In America, you're allowed to think or say anything you like, and they have no evidence he was anti-Semitic. He was arrested for criticizing Israel. It's a lot more complicated than that, though. For another perspective, here's what Jewish-Israeli Columbia professor Shai Devarai had to say. Like Mahmoud Khalil, I am too on a green card. Unlike Khalil, I don't support U.S.-designated terrorist organizations, take over university buildings, and call for the genocide of anyone. He wasn't arrested for speaking up. He was arrested for breaking the conditions of his stay here. Now, one of the points that Trump supporters of this action, at least, are making is that there's federal laws that seem to authorize this kind of action. As Reason's Eugene Volka pointed out, 8 U.S.C. 1182A3 provides that any alien who endorses or espouses terrorist activity or persuades others to endorse or espouse terrorist activity or support a terrorist organization is inadmissible to the United States. He goes on to say that this law makes it clear that such aliens are also deportable once they are here. Volka writes, Congress then has authorized both denying visas to people based on their speech endorsing a wide range of violence and deporting based on such speech people who have already been admitted. Nor is this limited to illegal aliens. It is also applicable to lawfully admitted visitors, including those under student visas, and, as best as I can tell, those who are lawful and long-time permanent residents. What Volka points out, though, is that these federal laws have not been taken all the way to the Supreme Court as to the question of whether they're consistent with the First Amendment. So while there's law authorizing this, they could theoretically challenge it on First Amendment grounds, because there is some Supreme Court precedent saying that legal immigrants are entitled to some degree of First Amendment rights, even though they're not citizens. It's a common misconception that the US Constitution only confers rights upon people who are citizens, but actually no, it does confer some rights on non-citizens and immigrants as well. Now, I want to set aside this individual for a moment because a lot of the facts need to come out about exactly what he said and did and the situation around him, and just to talk about this conceptually for a minute. Do you really have the right to come into this country as a non-citizen and then openly endorse and support terrorism? I don't know that you do. Now, to be clear, I don't think people should be deported for simply criticizing Israel or even for being anti-Semitic, because that's subjective. What counts, that's just what offends a particular person. But engaging in illegal protests where you occupy buildings or openly supporting designated terrorist organizations may be a different story. That said, it does all rely on this question of whether green card holders who are lawful permanent residents to the United States are entitled to First Amendment rights. Somebody like someone on a student visa has less rights because they're just a temporary visitor. They would probably have a stronger case just focusing on those people. But if green card holders are entitled to full First Amendment rights, then deporting them for this speech would be unconstitutional, unless they did actions that constituted material aid in support of a terror group. Simply broadly advocating for violence or in support of a terrorist organization actually is protected as First Amendment protected speech. The only exception is for incitement, but that has to be extremely imminent lawless action. So in the moment, telling someone, go punch that guy, rob that bank, not just in general saying, I think robbing a bank should be legal. That's allowed. In the same way, you couldn't actively encourage an ongoing act of terror, but you could broadly say, I think 9/11 was justified, or some other sort of evil, unhinged statement, and that would be First Amendment protected speech, no matter how reprehensible and vile it is. So, if green card holders are entitled to First Amendment full protections, then retaliating against them and deporting them for this speech would be unconstitutional. So a lot rests on that ultimate determination. And on that point, I think the Trump administration is to some degree making a mess of things by conflating two different things: supporting literal terrorism and saying offensive things. If they solely focused on we will deport people who support official recognized terror groups, they'd be in much stronger territory. But they are conflating it with other things, as Trump did in his statement about all this. He wrote on Truth Social, following my previously signed executive orders, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terroristic, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. So this is a problem. He's conflating pro-terrorism speech with things that are anti-American or anti-Semitic. According to who? The government? So what ideas they just find upsetting or offensive? That does this whole thing a massive disservice and very much muddies the waters. It also almost certainly has a chilling effect on people's ability and willingness to say their opinions and express themselves on college campuses or just in general, which is really important to the function of an open campus atmosphere. Because now, well, what if the Trump administration thinks my speech is offensive or anti-American? That's so subjective. That will chill people's speech and their ability to express themselves without fear of repercussions. But again, if they had just focused on deporting and targeting people, not for offensive speech, not for anti-American speech, not for anti-Semitism, but for actual support of registered terrorist organizations, they'd be on much stronger footing. But even then, I would have some problems with this particular individual's case and how it's being handled. The main issue I have with how this particular situation went down is related to due process rights, the right to fair and transparent proceedings, which is a constitutional right that, yes, lawful permanent residents like green card holders are entitled to. If his side of the story about how this all went down is true, then it appears to me that his due process rights were violated. As CNN reports, Khalil was apprehended by two plainclothes Department of Homeland Security agents at the university-owned apartment building where he lives with his wife, a U.S. citizen. To be clear, this information is coming from Writers Against the War on Gaza, which is a source that is biased on one side of this conflict and in support of Khalil. The DHS agents said that the State Department revoked Khalil's student visa, although he does not have a student visa, but rather a green card, and is a lawful permanent resident, the group said. When Khalil's wife, who is 8 months pregnant, showed the agents his green card, one agent was visibly confused and said on the phone he has a green card, according to the news release. However, after a moment, the DHS agents stated the State Department had revoked that too. Khalil's wife then phoned his attorney, who spoke with the agents in an attempt to intervene, the group said. When Khalil's attorney requested that a copy of the warrant be emailed to her, the agent hung up the call. So we have to ultimately find out if this account of how things went down is true. But if it is, there are some serious problems here. First off, they didn't know that he had a green card, not a student visa. That's, if true, a huge, huge problem. Like, if you're going to be doing stuff this serious, get your crap together first. And two, when the attorney has to see the warrant and you hang up on them, yeah, that's not okay. You have to show them the warrant you have for this person's arrest. Or if you don't have a warrant, you have to tell them that. The Associated Press has further details on this story. As ICE agents arrived at Khalil's Manhattan residence Saturday night, they also threatened to arrest Khalil's wife, an American citizen who is 8 months pregnant. Yeah, they can't do that. She's a U.S. citizen, so Khalil's attorney said they were initially informed that he was being held at an immigration detention facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey. But when his wife tried to visit Sunday, she learned he was not there. Greer said she still did not know Khalil's whereabouts as of Sunday night. They eventually found out that he was taken to an ICE detention center in Louisiana. But for a while, they just didn't know where he was, and he disappeared into this system. That's, again, a huge due process problem. Legal immigrants and lawful residents have a right to due process, and if this reporting is truly how it all went down, I don't think this man's right to due process was respected. And that is unacceptable, no matter how you feel about the broader question of deporting people who express support for terror. Now, a judge has ordered a pause to this while all the legality can be figured out. The AP reports a federal judge in New York City ordered Monday that Khalil not be deported while the court consider a legal challenge brought by his lawyers. A hearing is scheduled for Wednesday. I think this is correct. They shouldn't rush and deport him from the country until the legality of all this has been sorted out. Ultimately, this whole situation is kind of a mess. I do object to how this particular individual has been treated, even if I do find many of his views abhorrent. And even if they are legally allowed to deport people who are pro-Hamas, I think the Trump administration needs to get its crap in order and stop conflating things and not having all the details set before moving forward with such serious actions. That said, many Democrats are totally jumping the gun, acting as if the very project of deporting people, non-citizens who express open support for terrorism, is somehow not just illegitimate, but fascist. And while it might be debatable, it's not dystopian to do that. They're also already lionizing this man, Mahmoud Khalil, as if he's some sort of hero or martyr. That's also a mistake. The right way to defend this man's rights would be to make clear that it's about the principles of due process and free speech, but not laud such a deeply radical person as if he's some hero. Think of how that resonates with Jewish voters or Jewish Democrats to see Democratic elected officials not just standing up for rights, which even terrible or people accused of terrible things deserve rights and fairness, but actually kind of hero worshiping a guy who, from their view, and understandably so, has some pretty abhorrent views and is accused of literally supporting terrorism and the terror attacks on October 7th. Lionizing that kind of a person is not going to go over well with a whole lot of people if the Democratic Party really goes all in on that. Just generally speaking, free speech is one of the defining values at the core of my politics and everything I believe in. But I also think that as long as due process is followed, and that's a big precondition, people who come here as immigrants and commit crimes like illegally occupying businesses can and should be sent home. That said, I'm also deeply uncomfortable with a kind of government purge targeting ideologies and ideas they don't like with legal consequences. But there is a line somewhere when it comes to supporting terror. I honestly just don't have all the answers on this one. It is incredibly complicated, it's an evolving situation, and there's some really serious competing principles and values at play. But I just wanted to present you guys with the facts, a little bit of my analysis, perspectives from both sides, and then you can all make up your minds for yourselves. Do let me know where you come down on this issue and this question. I really do want to hear from you guys in the comments. I'll be keeping an eye out. And now it's time for some quick hits. Crazy stories that came across my desk in the last 24 hours that I want to run through with you guys. First, there's a clip of Charlie Kirk going viral where he agrees with a socialist student. Take a listen to this.
What policy do you support to make it easier for young people to buy homes?
Get rid of BlackRock purchasing a bunch of homes and renting them back to us.
Okay, so seize their assets?
Not seize their assets. Make it illegal that asset managers over $500 billion can't buy single family homes.
Okay, I really agree with that. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah. It's a super simple policy fix. If you have assets under management over $500 billion or $100 billion, you should not be in the single-family home business, period.
Okay.
And that's artificially boosting housing prices across the country. I believe homeownership is a moral good for all humans.
So Charlie sounds like AOC here, and basically everything he's saying is factually incorrect. He's not even talking about the right company. BlackRock does not own single-family homes. This is a commonly repeated but actually false claim. It's a company called Blackstone that is involved in the kind of corporate ownership of homes and renting them out that he's upset about in this clip. But that is not the cause of high housing prices in this country, because it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the US housing market. This graph that I'll put on screen shows institutional ownership as a percentage of the total single-family housing stock. Blackstone owns just 0.06% of the total housing stock of single-family homes. All the institutional owners combined own just 0.5%, so 0.5%. So blaming that for high housing prices is nonsensical. Even if you think those companies are gouging people with high rents or whatever, that's not the main culprit here whatsoever. It's basically a boogeyman that progressives have made up and spread, and yet you have a prominent conservative activist who claims he's all about capitalism, and Charlie Kirk not just agreeing with it, but affirmatively embracing it. All while ignoring the real problem, at least in this one clip, as to why housing is so expensive in the first place, which is very much the absence of capitalism, where governments, states, and localities across the country make it incredibly expensive and costly to build new housing, artificially constraining the supply and leading to higher prices. That's the real issue here, and it's disappointing to see conservative commentators buying into false socialist narratives and inaccurate framings on such core important issues. Other than that, great work, Charlie. Up next, this anti-Trump TikTok is actually unhinged. Take a listen.
If you come into my work with some Donald Trump propaganda on, you're getting harassed. You are getting harassed. I don't make the rules. I just follow them. Harassed. 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 Picked on. Pew pew. I don't care how old you are.
Well, she seems lovely. What is the I don't care how old you are part supposed to mean? Is she talking about like elderly people? She's going to harass your great grandpa? Or is she talking about like kids? She'll bully kids if they have some sort of MAGA gear on. Because either way, kind of demonic. And I'm sorry, but if this was my employee and I saw this video and I'm running a small business or any sort of store where I want everybody's business, regardless of their politics, she's fired instantly. Honestly, already, I probably wouldn't have hired her because that bull-looking ass nose ring, 9 out of 10 times is a red flag that they have insane opinions. But if I did have her employed at my company and I saw her openly saying she would harass a huge swath of my customer base, she would not be long for employment in my business. And we need to bring back consequences for people's actions, okay? Because it's actually not okay to harass and bully other people because you disagree with them. And people who do that and engage in that kind of childish and petty behavior are not the good guys and should face accountability for their toxicity. Up next, did you know it was recently International Women's Day? I mostly knew about this from social media, but I was very curious to see a clip from something called the Womxn, so WOMXN March in New York City, because apparently the word woman is like offensive or something. So they make it like gender neutral with it. I don't know. So anyway, here's an absolutely insane clip from this rally in New York City featuring a trans activist ranting and raving about women.
It was women teaching me that there is no definition that anyone can find to define what is a woman that excludes me, that does not also exclude millions of cisgender women. Women born without a uterus, women born with chromosomal incongruities, women with hormone imbalances, women with facial hair. According to the Boston Children's Hospital, 1 in every 5,000 women is born without a vagina. There is no way to say that trans women do not belong without also saying that all of them are not women either, and I dare you to say to their faces they are not.
Hey, so this is insane. A woman is an adult human female, and we are, in fact, in almost every case, able to distinguish as to what biological sex someone belongs to. The fact that some females have variations or abnormalities doesn't change the fact that they are females. And the fact that some females have abnormalities doesn't make males females. Of course, I have no problem with people with gender dysphoria who want to live as if they're the other sex, but you're not literally that sex, and pushing scientific gobbledygook and woke nonsense like this does not help your cause. And honestly, like, not to sound like Matt Walsh up in here, but I would love to know what this person would say when asked, what is a woman? Because their definition seems like just, okay, well, whoever feels like one, which then reduces that to meaninglessness. If you ask me, that's not very feminist. But seriously, what is the Womxn Day rally in New York City's definition of woman? I would love to hear this person's answer to that, but I won't be holding my breath. Okay, up next. Democrats are straight up lying about Elon Musk. Elon recently gave an interview talking about Doge and his efforts to cut government, where he said this about Social Security and entitlements.
I mean, the way it's important in entitlement spending, which is which is most of the federal spending is entitlements. So that's like the big one to eliminate, because that's the sort of $500 billion, maybe $700 billion a year.
So what he said in this clip was that the waste report for entitlements like Social Security is a huge part of what they want to eliminate, coming out to like $500 billion a year. But dishonest Democrats took this clip and claimed Elon says he wants to eliminate Social Security and entitlements. The Fact Post, which is the official rapid response account of the Democratic Party, wrote, Elon Musk says he wants to eliminate programs like Social Security and Medicare. Entitlements, ... That's the big one to eliminate. Of course, they're literally lying. The clip they attached to this tweet shows him saying something different, that he's clearly referring to the waste part of Social Security and Medicare, which maybe isn't as much as he says it is. Maybe they can't actually cut it, but he's clearly not saying they're going to cut the whole programs. But that's what tons of liberal figures and Democrats immediately claimed. Influencer Brian Tyler Cohen shared, and there it is. Elon Musk just said he wants to cut Social Security and Medicare, calling them entitlements. That's the big one to eliminate. California Senator Adam Schiff wrote, Elon Musk and Donald Trump want to go after Social Security and Medicare. Don't take my word for it. Here's Elon happily telling a host, that's the big one to eliminate. Easy to say when you're the world's richest man, not so easy when you're a senior depending on both. All of these people are sharing a clip in which he clearly verbally says something different than the take they're attaching to it. That has to just be a lie. Or they're so lazy and sloppy, they didn't even watch the video they're sharing and just took on face value the deceptive partisan spin that the original account put on it. I'm honestly not sure which is worse. I have plenty of criticisms of Elon, but I feel like it's not too much to ask that people don't just blatantly lie. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Let me know which one of these quick hits was your favorite or you found the craziest. And all right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. Do check out the merch, link below, and we'll talk again real soon.